Podcasters, welcome back. It's the Progress Theory podcast here. And today it's the Legend series. And on this episode, we are joined by Dr. Bernadette Dancy. Now, I've known Bernie for a number of years. When we first met, we were both teaching at St Mary's University. She was a senior lecturer in health and exercise science. Since then, she's left academia and now works as a health coach and running coach, where she works with a number of high-profile people that are struggling with stress, depression, anxiety, and teaches them how to reframe their perceptions on stress and ultimately develop a stress management strategy to help improve their lifestyle. This episode is a really personal episode. Both Bernie and I discuss our experiences with stress and find that our experiences actually have a lot of similarities. Stress can really build up, and it gets to a point where all the stresses in our life just become too overwhelming. And I recommend anyone that feels they're reaching their limit to seek the help out of someone like Bernie, who can really help reframe their relationship with stress and ultimately lead them to a better lifestyle. With that, I really hope you enjoyed this podcast. Please leave a review on our iTunes and on our Spotify, because we love doing these podcasts. Please check out all of our content on YouTube and subscribe and follow us on Instagram. So this is the Progress Theory Legend series. This is episode 2, and you're joined by Dr. Bernadette Dancy. Well, Bernie, thank you for coming on to the Progress Theory podcast. We were just chatting regarding sort of how we know each other and the similarities of our stories. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted you on this podcast. You were one of the first people that I thought about when I started the Legend series. Do you want to just give a little bit of an overview of yourself and your current role? And then we can go from there.
Yeah, definitely. Being called a legend just makes me feel old, Phil. You know? but that's true. I am getting old, and that's the thing in my head. I still think I'm 24, and I was 40 this year, so that was a bit of a shock to the system. So we know each other because we went back. We've worked at the same academic institution, and so for about 15, 16 years, I was a lecturer. I guess across 2 subjects, which really has led me to where I am today. So my undergraduate degree was biology, joint honours with sports science, but I always had this kind of real fascination with the interaction between body and mind. So I love biology. It just always made sense to me. So I studied human biology, but then I got really gripped with like sports psychology and exercise psychology as I went through my degree. So that kind of led me to doing a PhD. I was invited back to do a PhD. In fact, I was in America. I was coaching soccer. I was in America coaching soccer for the MLS at the end of my degree, and I was out there, and I had this offer of a job to be like the high school soccer coach at a school. And then I also got an email at the time from St Mary's, one of my old lecturers, saying, "Look, we've got this PhD studentship come up. We really think you should interview for it." And I'm like, "Well, I'm in America, and I've now got this potential job." And so it's a real what do I do? And I just remember I was really struggling whether I stay or go back. It's one of those real crossroads in your life, and it could have gone either way. But anyway, I was like, well, I'm never going to do a PhD if I don't take this opportunity. So I took the opportunity, and my PhD was in sports psychology just because that was on the table. And I did love that area at the time. It was definitely a fascination. Like, what was it that made people perform at such a high level? What was it about that grit and that kind of leave everything on the table and just push yourself to the death? And I was fascinated by that. But equally, I was fascinated by what was it that made other people kind of suffer and struggle, and what was it in them that made them maybe not make it some elite athlete. So I kind of, went through my PhD and did that. And now after 15, 16 years of doing that, there's lots of reasons, but I left academia. I think I burnt out, broadly speaking, burnt out with academia, but burnt out physiologically as well. I definitely had a massive event in my life where I just had enough chronic stress. I was diagnosed with PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder, after my dad died when I was 24, actually. Probably why I still think I am 24, because it's a significant time in my life. And I think there was just so much kind of that came to a head, and it made me realize that I wasn't dealing with that, but I just buried my head in work and life and just kept going. And I was always that person that pushed and pushed and pushed, the next thing, the next goal, what else can you do? And always I guess, wore stress as a badge of honor, like most of us do, that we strive and we overcome it and we go to the next level. But what's next level? And I got kind of sucked into that environment, but it broke me. And then I decided that things needed to change. I had a real look at myself and my life, and my children were quite young at the time. So Callum was just starting school and Ewan was like 15, 16 months old. And unfortunately, the way the world is, being a woman, it's not really set up for us to do everything, as much as we like to pay lip service and say, yeah, you can be a mom and you can have the career. For me, it didn't work. I couldn't do all the things, and it was too much. So I made a decision to set up my own business and be a health and exercise coach. We've just taken all of the things over the 15, 16 years that I'd learned in academia, and was like, you know what, rather than just teach this, what if I just went to the coalface and delivered it? And so I've spent the last 4 years now doing that, working with clients and specializing actually in stress management. So looking at behavior change and lifestyle changes to manage stress, which was, I know it's kind of like interesting because that's what happened to me. But when I went into health coaching, it was like, well, who do you want to help most? And the advice you kind of get when you do that coaching kind of training, and it's like, well, who were you like 4 or 5 years ago? Essentially what happens is you end up wanting to help because you learned so much about you and what happened to you 4, 5, 6 years ago. And that it drove me, like it really lit me up, because I was like, okay, I made these mistakes and these things didn't work. And this is what I now know, and this is how I can help these people. So it's been a real journey, and I would never go back, I don't think.
Yeah. What, during the sort of last few years of your PhD and working in academia, aside from obviously going full in with your work, what were the different life stresses that were affecting you at that time that just sort of overwhelmed you? Because I know you did a lot of long distance running, while being a parent, while being in academia. There was lots of different things going around.
Yeah. I think, do you know what? I think when you're in your early 20s, and my husband Paul, like, we weren't married at the time, but we were both doing PhDs at the same time. And we were very blessed and very lucky for that to happen, because I think when you are doing a PhD, it is your life, it becomes your world, and it becomes this thing where, you work all day with the students, whatever. And then it was like, well, I can stay at work till 8 o'clock and work on my research. And that was a luxury. And, I might go for a run after work and then stay till 8 o'clock, go home, have dinner, repeat. And it just became the cycle of repeat. And because Paul was doing the same kind of thing, it wasn't an issue, because we both, that's what we did. And we respected that's what we both needed to do to get your PhD done. And I think you can get away with that. And I got away with it for quite a long time. And because there were no other stressors as such, that was it. It was eat, sleep, train, do your PhD, repeat. And that could happen. And then I think when my dad did die, so I was like 2 years into my PhD when my dad died. And it was such a significant event, just to briefly touch on it, because it's quite a poignant thing that impacted the rest of my kind of life decisions. Was my dad was only 47, so really young. And as I hit my 40s, I'm like, shit, I was actually quite young. I used to wind him up about being old. But I was 24 and he was 47, and he had a sudden cardiac arrest. So he basically went to bed and had a cardiac arrest, and my sister called me. And I guess in those situations, like when you do your first aid training, you go into autopilot. So for me, it was like, okay, this is happening. I knew what to do. And you just everything shuts down and it's tunnel vision, and you just handle it. And so I started CPR with him, and we worked on him for a period of time. I couldn't tell you how long it was, but until the paramedics came. And then it was actually fire brigade who got there first. And unfortunately, by the time we got to hospital, he didn't make it. And I think that was such a significant turning point in my life for obvious reasons. I mean, losing a parent is significant enough, but to watch somebody die in front of your eyes, you can't even begin to explain what that feels like, or how powerless you are in that situation. And to go from being somebody who always felt in control, like, I think up until that point in my life, I'd never, quote unquote, failed at anything. Do you know what I mean? I passed my driving test first time. Any exam I did, I just got through it. Literally everything had fallen in place. I got my PhD, I got into that studentship. Everything just happened. And suddenly I was presented with this, like, yeah, but you didn't fix that, or you failed. So it was like a real traumatic situation, but then I internalized it that was my fault in some way. And so no matter what anyone would say to me, I thinking like, well, yeah, but you weren't there. And what if I'd done this and what if I'd done that? And, at the time I was diagnosed with PTSD, but again, I was like, yeah, I'll deal with that later because I'm doing my PhD and now I need to do that. And I kind of just blocked it out. And that's quite a common reaction to PTSD. It's an avoidance strategy because it's so overwhelmingly potent and traumatic that you can't process it in real time. So you kind of just block it out because the triggers and the flashbacks are so strong that you have to build a life up around you that protects you from that. So I blocked it all out. And then I guess throughout my PhD, it was always that kind of thing, like I lost love for it because yes, I was struggling with that, but it was also like, this doesn't mean anything anymore. So my PhD was in stress and anxiety, but it was on elite footballers, so professional footballers looking at, that whole kind of being dropped as a substitute. So the whole concept of you have to perform well, even though you're told you're rubbish. So you've been dropped, but you've got to perform well. So my PhD was looking at the impact of that decision on someone's professional career and the anxiety of coming on to perform well despite being told they weren't very good. And to me, I was like, yeah, but who gives a shit about that? Like, I just genuinely couldn't care less because I was like, yeah, but people are dying. Like people are dying, and I've seen someone die. And my dad actually died, he was quite young, but if you look at his history, it was stress predominantly that contributed to his death. So the night he died was a weekend I'd gone home with Paul because just to visit family, but my granny, his mum, had a cardiac arrest on the Friday night. My dad died on the Sunday night because and she was still in hospital, so we couldn't tell her. So we had to lie to her for weeks. He was at work. She's like, "Why is he visiting me?" Because she survived and he didn't. And so I think, when you were doing a PhD, it becomes your world, and everyone in an academic environment, that's the focus, and it just wasn't for me. And I think when you're wrestling with that, but that I knew I couldn't leave it because I wanted to finish for him, and also I just wanted to get it done to get on with my life because I knew at that point I wanted to go down a different path. I knew I wanted to go down the health and exercise psychology route, and I just kind of needed to get this done. I was like, to get this out of my life so I can actually do what makes a difference. I think that's what happened to me anyway. What about you?
Well, it does sound that there's similar feelings towards certain events within both of our PhD journeys. Definitely hearing your story made me reflect on like how you said, by that point at 24, I hadn't really failed at anything. And referring back, when I particularly struggled, I think I realized just how privileged I was growing up because you have sort of good and bad times, but they didn't necessarily completely derail where I was going in life. And so I don't think I well and truly failed. And I think I've been incredibly lucky with everything I had. My first funeral that I ever went to, I was 31. So I'd never really experienced sort of stress like that at all. And then when it came to so I at the time had become program director for the undergraduate degree of strength and conditioning. At a time where we lost 3 members of staff. So then I was covering so much work and learning a new job at the time. And I think at the time I was just like, look, this is really hard, but, I've just been promoted. This is still good. I'm just going to keep going. Very similar to you. It's like, it's stress, but, whatever, I'm heading in the direction I want to go. You just stick up a lift. You just keep going. And then I'd had an extension because I was just not able to get the work done. So everything was becoming sort of very last minute. And then me and my, now wife, moved into our new home. And then a week later, she then collapsed and had meningitis. So that was particularly tough because it came to a point where physically I wasn't doing too well, but I was just trying to get through it. And then all of a sudden, when my wife became very ill, it's just sort of like everything kind of collapsed. It became very overwhelming, and I was trying to do something which I was like, I've got other things to sort out. I just but I know I needed to do this for what I perceived as, get the PhD done, because then I can have a career and then, support my family and all that.
Yeah.
And funny enough, that was at the same time as, I don't know if you spoke to Paul, when they started threatening everyone with redundancy.
Yeah.
So that happened in like the same, 2 to 3 months. So it just became one of those situations where I think I've just been very lucky. I've had good and bad times. And then all of a sudden I just had a point in my life where it became so overwhelming, the stress from all different angles. If I could have each individual stress on its own, I might have been able to handle it better. But because they all came at once, all that could go through my head was I wasn't good enough. I couldn't handle the stress.
Yeah.
But maybe, I was making it worse by just trying to keep going, not really addressing it. Just get this PhD done, don't address it, wait until that's done, then you can sort of address it. But it kind of, that takes a bit of time. So, it's a long period just to feel incredibly stressed.
I remember it's just, go for it. Yeah, it's overwhelming. I think people don't appreciate. I think, and this is the problem. You say what you're going to say, but I think we don't tell people, is what I was going to say. You probably didn't tell people at the time, did you? It probably wasn't very obvious to people.
No, maybe I would tell people briefly how I was feeling, but then I was trying to just crack on, very stoic. Yeah. So then maybe my actions wasn't matching what I was saying. So then people's perception of me was like, oh, he's all right, he's just cracking on. Yeah. But what I was thinking was, for some reason during that time, I kept trying to find like an illustration to match how I was feeling. And everyone goes through big, highs and lows. Everyone's being really upset because of some issue. And I certainly had sort of bad points, but then what I felt during this period was completely different to that. Because the way I could describe it was, if it was represented by a picture, it would be a person smiling, and then they would have sort of dream bubbles moving away from their head. And then in the cloud, the big cloud or dream bubble would just be a really aggressive grey scribble. And that is the best way I could describe how
with a lot of expletives.
Yeah, I don't know.
And I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's that whole face that we put on. And I would have seen you around the time that I burnt out and broke down. And I remember feeling like you described is that there was an external face and there was an internal front. And Paul didn't even know, like my own husband. And Haley probably didn't know about you because you don't want to worry people. And also I didn't know, and like you probably, I didn't really know what's happening to me. I just thought I was failing because I was like, well, you can't let people down. I was part-time lecturer, but, part-time ended up being 40 hours a week because when I was teaching, and when I was, how do I get my prep done? Well, I've got to get the kids to bed, and they weren't sleeping. My kids were terrible. They never slept. So I'd eventually get them to bed at 10, have to finish writing the lecture for the next morning. Probably the kids were awake a couple of times in the night. So I was working on about 4, 5, 6 hours sleep, plus then trying to do some running. And it's like, no one knew. And it was just an external thing that I was like, yeah, but if you don't suck it up and do the work, you'll just be that woman who couldn't hack being a mum and still be good at your job, and things will start to slip. So I kind of just was like, well, yeah, we just get on with it. No one else seems to be struggling. And actually it was interesting because it was at a time in the institution that we both worked at where things were generally quite good. It was the romantic period where we were all brilliant, it was really good. And like you said, there was a bit of a collapse after that. Yeah. And it was the good times, right? But we were probably all getting to the point where I think collectively there were a lot of people struggling. And I think, not that I caused a lot of other people to come out and say they were struggling too, but I remember that when I did eventually go, it was literally hands up, I can't do this anymore. And it was a conversation with Paul to say that I need to, this has to change. Plus I wasn't seeing the kids, I was dropping them off at nursery at 7, picking them up at 6, seeing them for an hour, putting them to bed. So I was like, what? Why am I doing this? This is just stupid. So other people, whatever works for other people, for me, it was an additional stressor, but no one knew. And when I would go to work, I then was, taking patients from the GP. So I'd set up this healthy lifestyle clinic. We won a contract with the local council where it was brilliant. We had this connection with GPs where they'd send patients to us. We would take them into the gym, and that was all my additional. That was just voluntary. Like that was just on top of, So because I loved doing it, I was like, I just love this work, but it was breaking me simultaneously. And when I eventually left, or took time off, I remember saying to them, I need some time off. And it was like, yeah, I'll take a couple of weeks and I'll be fine. And then, of course, a couple of weeks just wasn't enough. And it was like a real, like, you need more time. So I took 6 months, and it was the best thing I ever did in my life, because it gave me 6 months to do a lot of work on myself, really reflect and just get better. Because there's a side to stress which we don't see, which is the physiological underpinning to it. So for me, yeah, there was PTSD, and maybe even with you, with Hayley, there's trauma in those experiences that we experience with loved ones. Any sort of near-death experience can bring about that trauma, and it goes inwards. We can emotionally maybe look on the surface like we're handling it, but physiologically it changes things, neurologically, chemically. And just the levels of cortisol that we get. We can't feel that. It's insidious. It's in us, It's a bit like hypertension. I used to say to patients all the time that you've got hypertension, you can't see it, but you need to change your lifestyle. But because people don't see it, and, the same as a temperature, it's the same with cortisol. And what was going on physiologically for me was that I needed that time to reboot and to kind of just recover. And 6 months helped me to do that. But I learned that even though I'd spent years teaching the benefit of, say, exercise for depression, anxiety, and I taught health and exercise psychology. And even to this day, I talk about it in my own kind of podcast and the work I do with people. It's not spoken about that. Hang on a minute. There's so much more that we need to learn about stress. And what happens is in society that more and more people are experiencing this, what you experience, what I experience, but we just end up suppressing it and adding other stuff to the equation. Like we add exercise to it. It's marketed, it's promoted, I see so many people talk about it all the time. But for me, I needed to look into the research of stress and the physiology of stress and go, what is it my body needed? And I remember going to the GP and just explaining to her, like, I'm broken. And she's like, okay, well, sounds like you got depression. Have some antidepressants. I was like, you're not listening. I felt exasperated because I was like, I feel depressed, but I know there's more to it. I know from my experience, academia, physiology, etc. I was like, can you just do there must be a blood test to diagnose something. She's like, nah, not really, And I was like, can you do some bloods? Because I feel like there's more going on. And of course, my blood profile came back, loads of things were out of whack. So physiologically, I was essentially overtrained and burnt out at the same time. And if you can kind of work on those things, as well as the emotional side of stress, then you can get better quite quickly. But we don't even talk about it. We don't tell people. You would never have known. I remember when I left, people were like, but you don't get stressed. I'm like, it's because I'm good at hiding it. But all of you are stressed. And then I left, and yeah, people dropped like flies. I remember people just now and then reaching out to me going, yeah, I've left. I can't do it. And I was like, fuck.
It seems like uber common in academia at the moment.
Yeah,
like really common. I don't know, because I always found that outside of academia, people have this perception that, you only teach for your semesters, and then, you've got this really long holiday, and it's so far from that. And even now, like the fact that we're in a pandemic and we're working from home considerably more, I'm at my desk before 6 o'clock still every morning to try and get everything done, because we've got obligations to provide a great teaching experience for our students, but at the same time we're seen as experts in our field, so you're constantly reading, you're constantly trying to update your knowledge, you're constantly trying to there's the whole research world, including writing, data analysis, and trying to get grant money.
It's just impossible. And I think that's the thing. I reached burnout because I couldn't do all those things. And I actually went back to work, and I remember being at work. She had this phased return, and I was looking at the emails, and I was thinking about, you know what, if I come back, nothing's going to change because this environment hasn't changed. And I know my personality won't do well in this environment because I couldn't, all those things you listed, I couldn't do half-assed. Like I have to do all or nothing. So I knew if I went back to it, the teaching would get 100%, the admin would get 100%, the research, I was still trying to publish research whilst being part-time, the knowledge transfer would get 100%. Like, and it's just like, they're my kids and my marriage. And it's just like, well, hang on a minute. Like, what about you? What about your health, your mental, physical health? And I think we are being stretched. And it comes down to, learning about your own needs and physical and mental health needs. And, in some ways working to rule and knowing what your limits are and recognizing when you've got close to those limits. For me, working self-employed and being a consultant and being freelance is the best thing I ever did, because it gives me control over that. Like, I still work incredibly hard. I've got high work ethic, but I have to get my kids leave the house at 2:30 every day, 2:45 to get them. And then I'm with them and I have to do certain things. So I manage my stress in a different way. So life becomes a balance that I can control. And I think for me, it just felt like everything was out of my control. And that was a really difficult thing to get my head around.
Yeah. Since you've moved and become a health coach, are you finding that, like, we've described two separate stories that have a lot of commonalities, but now you're working with others, are you finding that everyone else has a very similar story where they've got one stress, then there's another stress is added, then another stress, and it's almost like an overwhelming mix of stresses?
100%.
And that's so everyone's kind of got the same story, but just different details.
Yeah, absolutely. So usually when people come to me and find me, it's with kind of where I was at. So it's like they hit this breaking point where they kind of go, I can't do this anymore. And we all have that. A lot of people listening can relate. And you've obviously had it, I've had it. And you kind of get that crossroad. You're like, well, I've got to make a decision here. I got to suck it up, or I got to. But they kind of internalize to go, well, that means I'm a failure, so no one can know. And being a health coach, I think men are more inclined to come to me because it's not therapy. So they can justify it and rationalize it. Well, I'm seeing a health coach. I'm going to lose some weight and manage my stress. And they know they're not right. They know they feel broken. They know they feel exhausted. But it's not as scary as, say, reaching out to a therapist and admitting that I'm struggling. And when they start talking, it's very much, I'm like, so tell me what, you're obviously here because something's not right. Tell me what are you experiencing? And it might be, work's really stressful at the moment. And then we do a stress history, as you say, like go back and I kind of go, okay, so let's just talk about in the last 10 years, 20 years, what events in your life, good and bad. So we start, like, people don't realize, getting married is a stressor. Having doing your PhD is a stressor. Like having a baby, incredibly stressful. Like all of these events in your life, if they're layered upon layered upon layered upon stress, or in my case, trauma, they've got nowhere to go. And we look at their kind of automatic coping mechanisms and talk about how that served them. So a lot of the time it's avoidance. A lot of the time it's suck it up. And it's like, well, or it's self-medicating, so alcohol, or even in some case drugs, or food, emotional eating, or exercise, medicating by exercise. And all the things we talked about, that's just additional stresses on top of it. So there's eventually this like explosion. And sometimes people come to me really, really broken. And oftentimes they're just at that place where, like, okay, we've caught you now, let's work back. And they don't even recognize, you mentioned, what are the other things? I had this one guy, CEO of a massive company over in Paris, and he was so stressed that he couldn't even barely speak. He couldn't really comprehend. And we used to do calls in his office, so his secretary would schedule his session. And I said to him, have you eaten or drank today? He was like, oh, no, I haven't had time. And I was like, you're not making any sense. Like, his blood sugar's obviously dropped. He wasn't hydrated. So I used to make him eat while we did our session, like just have some water and have a bit of food, because he just literally, like that, was a robot. He'd be up by 5, he'd walk like a dog, he barely ate, long periods of time without eating. And when we look back, he was like, oh, I'm just stressed at work. That's, I just need you to help me with this. I was like, okay, cool. Let's just have a little chat. Like, all this stuff's happened. And he had a car crash with his family like a few years previous to that, which was so significant that, he'd again sucked it up. Well, it happened. I moved on, dealt with it. I was like, but did you deal with it? And subsequently we got him into some therapy. So the work that I do is I'm not a therapist. I do the lifestyle components, but in order to make room for that, they need to do the therapy alongside it. So he started working with a therapist about some of these things, and it just cleared a path to deal with the lifestyle elements, because he still had a lot of things that were in the background that were causing him to have this kind of lifestyle, because he was just self-medicating and blocking out and workaholics. I've read some really recent stuff recently, and I can probably admit that I would say I am a workaholic, but very well managed workaholic now. And a lot of us are in academia, and a lot of people are, and a lot of people I work with, and it's acknowledging that you are willing to go above and beyond. And then you kind of go, well, what's the impact on your physical health, your family? Then, you can address it. You can still work really, really hard, but you can kind of address it in a different way.
Are there any particular stressors that are becoming more frequent when you speak to clients? So you've got like family history, say someone passing away, or like the CEO, you've got a car crash. People can visualize that being quite a significant stress. But is there like a little insidious stress that seems to be sneaking into everyone's lives, that's coming up more and more in recent years, that people may just not be aware of how impactful it can be?
There's so many, but I do think just culturally as a society, we just have stigmatized stress. So we talk about the stigma related to anxiety and depression. We're doing a lot of work as a society to remove that stigma and open up conversations about depression, anxiety, and I think that's really helping. But I think the elephant in the room is there's such a stigma about saying you're stressed, because it's a weakness. I can't get hardly any of my clients to do testimonials for the work that we do, like honest, open testimonials, because why would they? They're like, this is my CV. They're successful business people, and then they give me a testimonial to say they've crashed and burned and had a burnout. They're like, well, I'm unemployable. And that's wow. Tragic, and I think because it's deemed, well, why would you want to employ someone who's going to burn out again? Or why would you want to employ someone who can't hack the stress? And so there's a kind of a cultural issue, I think, that we have almost backed people into a corner, that they have to work in a certain way. And then the micro stresses become the issue, the insidious stress. Like I get people, one of my clients last week, she said to me, I just don't understand, I should be feeling much, much better. So I'm a consultant for Rena McGregor, who's a clinical dietitian. And we work along a spectrum of eating disorders, which she works at the clinical end, hypothalamic amenorrhea, RED-S, so energy deficit syndrome of sport, overtraining, overreaching. And I'm kind of the lower end of the continuum. So tend to look at people who are maybe low energy availability, but accidental low energy availability, because they don't even realize that they're doing it. Same thing that happened to me, right? And I work with them, and there's this one client, and she's like, had hypothalamic amenorrhea for, I can't remember now, a period of time, and was like, but I'm back, I don't understand what's going on. Like my lifestyle's better, I'm sleeping better, my period's still not back, my BMI is normal, I've regained weight, what's going on? I was like, yeah, but it doesn't work like that. And when you look at all the micro stressors, being on her phone late at night, saying yes to work that she shouldn't be saying yes to, not seeing family, not having downtime, like not practicing self-care, not acknowledging what they actually need in their life. Self-awareness is just devoid in our generation, because we go from school to academia, to jobs, to careers, push, go. And no one asks you or teaches you about what your needs are. It's always about, what can you give us? What can you provide to the world? And I think the most important work I do with people is to recognize what those little micro stresses are and go, hang on a minute, what do you actually need as a human? Even to the point where it's like, well, what's your personality type? So I'm a massive introvert, and I didn't know that until I had therapy. And I thought, well, I'll stand up in front of 200 people and speak. I can't be an introvert. And she's like, no, it doesn't work like that. Like, introverts require a lot of introspective time and thinking, and get overwhelmed quite quickly by those environments. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, I can see how 15 years of being front facing of conferences and putting yourself out there was pretty exhausting, right? That is overlooked. That we are in a society and a culture where extroverts get rewarded. Extroverts is, even social media, you've got to be doing videos now, you've got to be posting all the time. There's like, you have to be upfront. But actually, what about people who are quietly getting on with stuff in the background? That can be overwhelming to them. So really getting introspective about who you are, what your needs are in terms of even sleep, contact other people? Do you like to be creative? How do you like to spend your time? What lowers that vibration in your body? What allows your parasympathetic nervous system to be activated? Because actually, most people are just switched on from the minute they open their eyes or on their phone to the minute they go to sleep. And they're literally switched on. And it's a cultural thing. And it will vary. So to answer your question, is there one specific thing? Not really. It's more generalized. That it'll be one thing for you, but it'll be different for me. And it's about sitting down with people and going, let's just really get clear about what you need. And is what you need matching what you're giving yourself? No. And there's usually a massive discrepancy. And we try and kind of meet and resolve that a little bit to help people.
Yeah. Speaking of social media, the talk around mental and physical health is definitely getting much more popular. More people are talking about it, trying to get more people to be open about, what do you need? Start thinking about yourself. Do you think that's a very positive thing, or do you think it's a message that sometimes gets a bit muddy because everyone has their own opinions on sort of this particular topic? I mean, you have a PhD in psychology, so but you will have people that don't have those qualifications, but they're trying to talk about these issues. And I've always seen that there's a difference between a facilitator and an expert. Do you think sometimes the message is getting a bit misguided out there, or it's just great that everyone's talking about it? It's allowing people to sort of come out and be a bit more open than previously they wouldn't have been before?
I think it's great that people are talking about it. I do think we are removing some of that stigma, but I think there's a secondary stigma that when people do come out and go, I'm struggling, they get some help, people rally around, oh my God, that's really good, thanks for telling us. But if you don't get better, they're like, are you still talking about that? Are you still depressed? Are you still anxious? Are you still stressed? Like, haven't you fixed that? And I sit with the clients I work with, it then becomes this, okay, well, I better not say anything now because I asked for help and now I'm not better, so it must be my fault. And so people kind of will repress it again. And I think there's an element of, it's okay for celebrities and it's okay for, certain people or people with massive social media following to go, oh, I'm really struggling. And that's brilliant. Again, it opens up conversation. But what about people who haven't got that voice, or haven't got that, or haven't got that dynamic in their family where they feel like they can speak out? It's not always possible. Because you might not get that support. There's nothing worse than asking for help and then it not being reciprocated, and it's really difficult to handle. And when it comes to, I struggle so much with this, Phil. Like I know you do too. I've seen your social media, like just false kind of information or misinterpretation of research. And again, it's the academic, the researcher in me. It's like you haven't, like if you. Firstly, give evidence-based information. If you want to be an influencer, you want to get give people information and actually influence them. Get the facts right. Go to the right places and find information. But in that case, then it's like interpreting is even difficult. So you and I know, like taking a research paper, you can read the abstract, but then the whole paper just might completely dismiss what was in the abstract. So it's really difficult for people. So I think as a medium to try and promote messages is brilliant, but it hits the post. So when people are going, I see celebrity trainers, for example, and I almost have to step away from my phone because I get so angry. It's like, God, like I had a really bad day. I've just got off a flight. I'm really, really stressed. I've had 4 hours sleep. The kids have been up, but I was up at 4 o'clock on the treadmill, smashing that session. I feel amazing. You can do it too. And I'm like, shut up. Because you know what? That's their world. Like I said to all my clients, your life isn't the same as theirs. You don't know what's going on for them. You don't know how much food they eat and you don't know how much sleep they've had. You don't know what's going on there. We cannot compare across people. We're at N equals 1, aren't we? Like we're case studies. And to go from being academic where I'm looking at big population samples and then having a client in front of me, you can't always take evidence from a randomized control trial and apply it to the client in front of you. It doesn't work like that. Same within coaching and S&C. You can't take the results from a paper and apply it to an athlete because it just might not work. Because it worked in a randomized control trial doesn't mean it works in one specific person. Yeah. So it really annoys me because actually we don't have enough evidence to back up the claim that exercise, and I'll call it exercise to distinguish between physical activity, because physical activity is just general movement, which is unstructured. So walking could be going to the gym, but it's not targeted towards a specific goal, and it's usually moderate. Whereas exercise is a structured approach to movement, where it's targeted towards a specific goal. There's no evidence, or there's very little evidence to show that high intensity or high volume of training in terms of exercise is beneficial for our physical or mental health, because all of the research is done in moderate intensity exercise or resistance-based training. And what we're getting is a culture of people, especially runners, and again, this is why I get a lot of runners to work with me, because I'm a runner too. It's not enough to just do a 5K or park run. You got to do a half marathon. You got to do a marathon. Next is like, okay, now it's ultra marathons. It's like, where do you stop? So there's a message that is just completely misconstrued, and it's telling people to do more. And I'm like, have you got the solid foundations upon which to add that training? If not, then don't do it. So if you've been up all night with the kids, if you've got loads of stress going on at work, should you be trying to do an Ironman? Probably not. One of the questions I ask people all the time is, now the right time to do this? You know, if you've got a lot going on, if you're adding what I call trainer stress to life stress, it's a recipe for disaster. And you might not break now, but they'll break in 6 months, 7 months. And they'll be like, oh, I've got this injury. I don't know where it's come from.
Yeah. It's the same with training. You get people that just go all out and they'll survive over the next 4 weeks. And so, oh, see, I'm doing the right thing. I've improved. And then it's like the 6-7 months down the line when their body breaks. They're like, oh, right, maybe I shouldn't have pushed so hard so soon. Yeah. And it's very similar from a sort of mental well-being situation 100%. As well.
Yeah, and it's layered, because it's levels of it's stress, it's trainer stress. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's emails in your inbox that you haven't dealt with. Your body doesn't discriminate. It doesn't know. It just knows that there's a demand placed upon you, and it reacts in kind. So it will raise cortisol. It will adapt within your body to deal with the stress. And in humans, the stress keeps coming. So it's loaded and it becomes chronic stress. And what actually we're designed to do is to deal with the stress. The stress goes away, we recover. We don't give ourselves enough time to recover, because it's like next. And not even recognizing that, okay, well, they might go, well, I'm not training, but I went on a 2-hour hike. Like, yeah, but that's volume. It's like your body hasn't recovered. Like, so no, that's not okay. You know, you get these questions all the time. Okay, I won't run, but can I go for like a 2-hour walk? Or can I, like, no, you got to rest. So we're just not very good at resting. And I think that comes down to a mindset thing. Like, we become high achievers, or we are high achievers for a reason, and that creeps into our health, and it creeps into across lots of different elements of how we work. So being a high achiever, doing amazing things in life is brilliant, but it's also something that we have to be careful that it can break us if we're not careful. You know, it can be good and bad, and being aware of being a high achiever and pushing yourself and being an elite athlete and working to the top level is great, but actually, can you also then use that self-awareness to make sure that your recovery is on point? So it's like, can you be perfect at that? Because that's actually what's going to get you the gains. That's the stuff that you're going to get better at.
Yeah. I remember seeing I think it was an Instagram post where they said, okay, before you think about your training, have you got these 3 key things properly organized? Food, water, and sleep. Yeah. And at the time I looked at it and I went, I maybe hit one of those.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, that's me personally.
Yeah.
So I was just like, and I think a lot of the times, sometimes if I've got a little niggle or some kind of injury, you know, I could try and link it back to some kind of movement deficiency or something like that. But it does seem to correlate with the time where I've been particularly busy at work, stress. It's meant I've slept less, stress.
Yeah.
There's so many factors that come in, but we shouldn't be missing these.
And it's not rocket science. This is the thing. This is where I get really frustrated, and it's kind of why I decided to start podcasts. So for quite a long time, in the work that I do, I get invited by other people I revere and experts to come and either work for them. So I'm a consultant for quite a few different people, other coaches, clinical clinicians, because they recognize the work that I do and they go, this is really important. But on the ground, on the coalface, like, people don't understand it because they don't even see it as a problem. So it's almost like I'm shouting into a massive cave, like, can you all just pay attention? Because no one wants to hear it. It's not sexy. It's not cool. It's not attractive. I've written many articles for, like, I don't know, Women's Running magazine and different things over the years, but the same article, 2 pages down, they'll be talking about oh, do this program for your marathon training. I'm like, no, like you can't be selling that to people. And also asking me to write an article about the importance of not picking up a random article training program, that it has to be bespoke. And you go like, so do you know what I mean? It's like we're paying lip service to it because it's not that like scientifically pleasing to hear. It's not rocket science. It's simply awareness about, as you say, those components and the pillars of health. And it's like, well, if you haven't got those solid foundations, you cannot add the training. So for me, I call it, like, I set up a group called Run Well, and it's about like, can we get people to manage sleep, nutrition, movement, and self-care? And self-care is such a big topic, but if we get all that right first, then we put the training on top. Suddenly they're better people, performers, mental health, physical health, etc. But it's just not cool. And it's not like it's a sexy topic to kind of talk about. But I think there's so many more people I see breaking or burning out that it's almost like being forced upon them as opposed to them seeking it out.
Yeah. Do you think because those components like sleep, like food, like water, they're seen as obvious? And because of that, that is the reason why they're mostly or quite often overlooked or underappreciated, because they think, oh yeah, that's obvious, and then they don't realize that the perception of their own actions are not aligning with what's actually happening.
Yeah, I think it just looks too easy. People want they want the program, the next exercise regime, the next training program. Do you know, they want the next scientific advancement to bring their train. Oh, that's the thing I need. So, you know, low carb, like the amount of people I work with who go, you know, again, corporate or mums or people working really, really hard in lots of different areas of life, and they're trying to train for a marathon and they're trying to go low carb so that they can run on fat adapted. And I'm like, do you know how hard that is? And also, how do you know you're fat adapted? Like, you just
that takes forever as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, and unless you get someone in the lab to basically identify that cross point where it happens, you don't know. But there was a period of time where people were doing that, and we're now picking up the pieces where we got a lot of young athletes or middle-aged people who did that. They were like, I'm not going to lie, I basically just cut out carbs and I was training for an ultra. But they don't understand the physiology, and you kind of go, okay, let's just break this down and strip it right back to basic physiology and go, okay, do we understand what macronutrient is? Do we understand the role in which these play upon your physiology when it comes to energy? And people don't. And when you explain to them, go, oh, that's why I tanked, that's why I feel like shit. You know, elite athletes can do it. It's a totally different ball game because they've got, you know, a multidisciplinary team around them. They've got testing. They can allocate, you know, people to look at certain aspects, and they've got shitloads of time to recover. But you or I or anyone else, we're adding it to life and life stress. And it's, people go, yeah, my food's fine, my sleep's good, like I could sleep a bit better, but I have to get up again, a bit like yourself. This one guy was like, yeah, but I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to do a 2-hour run, and then I take the kids to school, and then I'm working all day. And I'm like, well, why are you getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to do a 2-hour run when then you've got the rest of the day and you wouldn't eat till lunchtime? And it's like training fasted on top of that, it just adds stress to the body. You know, you're already stressed, you're not sleeping very well, and you're waking up fasted and doing a training run. And it's just crazy. And we're just breaking people. And I think they don't want to think it's as simple as that. They want to come to people like me or whoever to go, yeah, we'll just give you a more sophisticated training program. You're feeling tired, but actually, if you just change training, no, ignore your training for a minute and let's get right to the basics and fix that. And that's hard for them to accept because it's almost too easy.
Yeah, definitely.
Physiologically easy, but behaviorally and psychologically really, really hard, because it's the behavior change element to try and change habits. And people have almost an addiction to that exercise and that need to push themselves and punish themselves, really. Flog themselves really, really hard.
Do you think that's the way it's going? I spoke to a nutritionist a while back, and he almost feels like, well, I'm not a nutritionist in what people think I am. I'm more of a behavioral nutritionist. So it's changing behaviors, changing perceptions of stress, of tasks. Do you think that's the direction that we need to go?
Do you say that was a he?
Yeah.
So he sounds like a really good nutritionist, because I think too often, too quickly, people come and they're like, so can you just write me a nutrition plan?
Yeah.
So I did a couple of years ago, I I'd upskilled. I mean, I'm always learning, the eternal geek, but I did a nutrition therapy course. So I don't practice as a nutritionist, but I know enough because I was like, I need to just make sure I'm, upskilled a bit, CPD wise. And I'm like, no, you're not even ready for a nutrition plan, because it's not about the nutrition plan. And most people would admit, yeah, I probably wouldn't follow it anyway, because that's not really what the problem is. The problem is all the other components, and it's understanding like what they need. Yeah. And to change, because pretty much every woman I work with undereats in terms of the energy demands that they're asked of themselves. So just purely from like the work, the job that they've got, and then the training, because there's not enough time of the day to almost consume the amount of food they would need to be in energy balance. So they're always working in an energy deficit. And it's like they just crucify themselves, and it's really, really hard to perform. But then they're like, I'm not performing optimally, so I need to lose weight. So they get into this thing, well, I can't eat more because I don't want to gain weight, because I want to perform well. And it's like, no, but you need the fuel to perform well. Forget about the weight thing. The weight will look after itself when you're burning and energy expenditure is happening as a result of the exercise. It blows their mind to think that they potentially might have to eat more food or eat more frequently. So with stress, what we really are trying to do is think about what is happening when we don't eat. It's a stressor. The body doesn't know why we're not eating. It just essentially goes, okay, there's been a period of time where this person hasn't eaten. It has to adapt. So it has to release energy stored, to be able to help that person get their blood sugars back up and survive through the day. But in order for that to happen, cortisol goes up. So the stress hormone increases. So by perpetually keeping ourselves like underfueled or going for like gaps longer than 2 to 3 hours of, eat without eating something, that's a stressor. And people don't see that. They're like, yeah, it was all right. I'm like, no, you need to eat more frequently. So it's not about eating more food per se, potentially. It could be just like, can we eat more frequently? And that's where the behavior change comes in. It's trying to get people to change those habits, to think, okay, this is about fueling my body and taking away a massive stressor that they didn't even think was a stressor.
Yeah, definitely. Bernie, that was brilliant. I mean, I know I said at the beginning of the podcast that I really wanted to talk to you about certain issues because I knew our stories were quite similar. And a lot of it comes down to me fearing being like that again. So having knowledge around how to perceive different stressors and just the openness to become more aware of how they may be affecting me, I think is really great. Is there any way that if anyone has any questions or they feel they want to contact you about dealing with their stress, how is the best way to contact you?
So they can find me at just my website, which is bernadettedancy.co.uk, or I'm on Instagram predominantly. Twitter scares me. It's too loud and people shout at each other.
I'm with you there, definitely.
Everyone's got an opinion, which isn't always a good one. And so I stay away from those arguments. So yeah, Instagram, I'm quite happy to be on there. But yeah, people can just check out my website. But just to kind of, before I finish, just to reiterate what you were saying there, or to address that point of how do we make sure it doesn't happen again, or how do we, maybe if people are listening and they're feeling like, okay, I can relate to this, now what do I do? The first thing is literally self-awareness, and thinking about what your needs are and where they need to be addressed. Because for me, people say to me all the time, oh, but you're a stress coach, like, you must never get stressed. I'm like, ask my husband, ask my kids. There's a difference between acute, momentarily stressed, and then chronic stress. And I think the best advice I give people who are dealing with chronic stress is to respect it in the first instance. And for me, that's about, I almost treat my stress the way a type 1 diabetic would treat their blood sugar. And it's like, I'm very aware of it, acutely aware of it, and monitor it and know that, hang on a minute, if I'm feeling off, what am I not doing that I should be doing? It's usually sleep in my case. And just get really clear about what I'm not doing and get back into that routine. Usually it's crossing boundaries and giving people too much of my time. So I think for you personally, yeah, that might be something to think about, and just kind of give yourself that space to know that actually you're more important than anything else. Pushing yourself to the people doesn't really matter.
Definitely a continuing learning curve. That's brilliant, Bernie. Thank you very much.
So welcome.
I'll speak to you soon. Hopefully you'll pop by St Mary's soon.
Maybe.
Come say hi to Paul, and then I might be around as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Brilliant.
Cool.
Thanks, Bernie. Cheers.